In this world, weaklings were superfluous. Fate did not spare those whose will could not withstand its cruel tests. They were deprived of property, position, and even their own lives. It was enough to show weakness, and death was already reaching out its sharp teeth to you. About 100 years ago, a blinding beam of light, so blinding that it trembled, fell on the earth. He indiscriminately devoured everything in his path, and the blue star, which was the home of all things, very soon turned into an endless, sandy grave. The few who survived were left to build their own fortresses. The guy sat by the window of a bus, crawling through the scorching desert, and, looking at the endless play of sand, he thought that if he really wanted to destroy everything, he should have done everything thoroughly and not left worms like them alive. His thoughts, deep and lingering like a desert sunset, were interrupted by a crushing blow from a giant hand. A fellow traveler with a predatory grin on his face joked, "Oops, my hand slipped." He asked the guy to state his name, supposedly so that he could apologize to him properly. The guy fixed him with an intense gaze, blazing with golden fury, and quietly said, "Zeon." The booming laughter of his fellow travelers merged into a single stream. They hurled barbed jokes at the guy about an entire army of fathers, as if his single name were not a gift of fate, but a curse worthy of endless ridicule. A fire of hatred flared in Zeon's eyes, as if the darkness itself had gathered in two golden vortices, promising his enemies not just defeat, but complete and merciless destruction. Those who rode to the mine on this bus usually had one thing in common. None of them were miners. Everyone is either a criminal or a fugitive. Name one of the two, and you'll almost certainly guess. Zeon didn't wait for the big guy to wonder why he was there and struck first. He flew to the other end of the bus like a bowling ball. All the thugs' guesses about why Zeon ended up here turned out to be wrong. After all, it was murder. Although, strictly speaking, he did not kill a person, because in Neo-Soul, people were considered to be those who had power. And that little rat simply set his sights on his property, and that's why he died. But unfortunately, it turned out to be domestic, and also Li Ji-ren's brother. If the one in power is a person, then the awakened one is God, who stands above him, and some insignificant rat dared to anger God himself. Rumors soon spread that Li Ji-ren was looking for Zeon, but when he came to, he realized that he had already jumped on the buses heading to the mine. Waking up from his thoughts, he saw the face of the thug, with eyes burning with anger, just like his fist, and unexpectedly for Zeon himself, there was blood on his hand. The next moment, an opponent's blow sent him flying across the entire bus. Zeon flew, tumbling through the air. Everything might have been different if he had told that brute right away that they were here on the same business. But now he has crossed the line. Very badly. And this awakened one decided to teach him a couple of lessons. Suddenly, the bus started shaking, as if in a fever. Like a giant grasshopper, he pushed off from the sandy ridge, hung in the hot air for a moment, and then fell down with a heavy roar. All the passengers started shouting at the driver, thinking that his driving style was to blame. The driver sat motionless, his back straight, his hands gripping the steering wheel in a death grip. His gaze was fixed on the road ahead, as if he'd seen something unthinkable and was now afraid to blink. One of the miners, through the pain from his head, tried to understand what the driver was mumbling. And suddenly, I began to understand individual words from his incoherent speech. He said in confusion, "Not there. We were not going into the mine." The miner's gaze reflected anger and confusion about what was happening. The driver's glassy gaze revealed a primal horror. Cold sweat trickled down his temple, and a desperate cry burst from his chest. All this time, they were being devoured. The enormous mouth was ready to slam shut. The bus began to fall with a roar into a shifting sandy funnel, and in an instant, the passengers, torn from their seats, flew into a chaotic whirlwind, clutching at air amid clouds of dust. If you look from the outside, everything was an endless cycle of the same events. Whether it's Neo-Soul or meeting an awakened one, even dying in the mouth of a sandworm doesn't seem like a big deal. After all, in this world, it is quite normal for the strong to take everything from the weak. This means that Zeon's death is only a consequence of the fact that he was weak. It all seemed like a very simple and banal story. Of course, one could fantasize that if Zeon had been stronger, he would not have died like that. But now these were empty words, without any meaning. His mangled arm stuck out of the sand like a flag of despair. But suddenly the sand around her began to swirl into a funnel. His Zeona were filled with magical power. With one movement, he broke free from the sandy captivity. He tried to cough, but he still couldn't get enough air. And at this time, magical energy flowed through all his veins like a river. The sand, merciless and inexorable, swallowed everything indiscriminately. The energy of the deserts boiled in Zeon's veins, and his muscles filled with the power of thousand-year-old dunes. It was as if the desert had decided to wipe out any reminder of life from the face of the earth. Nothing could escape his all-consuming grip, but he gave Zeon enormous power. The sand, fierce and merciless, inexorably pulled trees, stones, and ruins of buildings into its bottomless mouth. But at the same time, he granted superhuman strength. The sandy land emitted a mysterious attraction, and meteorites, obeying an unknown force, rushed towards its surface, crashing into the hot dunes one after another. Inside Zeon, one could clearly feel this enormous power, ready to burst out at any moment. Suddenly, his hand turned into a sand blaster. Its beam burst out from the sandworm's body with enormous force. Now Zeon was confident that he could survive. Let this world turn to sand. But this battle had to have a winner, and Zeon turned out to be stronger. He managed to get out of the belly of the huge worm, and now looked at it from the outside. The guy clearly felt the pulsation. Every cell in his body seemed to be in motion. It was an awakening. A huge sandworm aimed its mouth at Zeon. The ground shook with a furious jerk, and rows of jagged teeth were ready to grab him in that very second. The guy was ready to accept this challenge, but suddenly, someone's hand moved him away so that he would not get in the way. In that split second, he didn't have time to understand anything. Suddenly, he found himself flying upwards, high above the ridges of sand. Zeon landed awkwardly in the sand, clearing his throat. He tried to understand what kind of psycho was standing next to him, and when did he manage to end up here? A fountain of black liquid spurted out of the enormous worm. It was completely incomprehensible how it had grown so large. It was a bit scary at that height, so the stranger decided to go back down, and with one kick, he knocked the huge blade into the monster. The giant sandworm, shuddering with searing pain, let out a deafening roar that rolled across the desert, shaking the dunes and causing the air to vibrate in a terrifying resonance. Zeon couldn't believe his eyes as he watched what was happening. The stranger dealt with the worm with such ease that it thought he was awakened. It was Captain Jang Yongbom. Zeon turned around abruptly and saw an unfamiliar girl next to him. How she appeared there was also a mystery. She was much stronger than she looked, and her grip made your hand go cool. For the captain, the sandworm was not such a difficult opponent. As he approached, he glanced sideways at Zeon. A girl named Giselle was ready to listen to the commander's order and carry it out without question. She pulled Zeon towards her with all her strength, and then with a sharp movement, she twisted it into a ram's horn. So she decided to test the rank and abilities of her new acquaintance. Suddenly, she stopped for a second, and she told the commander that this guy was not awakened. But Zeon fundamentally disagreed with her. The whole point was that he didn't have a rank mark on his hand. Lying face down in the sand, Zeon listened with anger as the two discussed the lack of a sign. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an armored car. Sunset was about to begin. It was time to leave. Giselle asked the captain what to do with the boy, because if he was left here, he would definitely die. Jang Yongbom glanced towards Zeon, and then he responded in kind. Suddenly, the commander ordered that he be loaded into the jeep since he was moving towards the mine anyway. The jeep, shimmering crimson and gold in the rays of the sunset, rolled inexorably across the endless desert. Its heavy wheels pressed into the sand, leaving behind a trail of dust and long shadows stretching out towards the approaching night. In the car, Giselle and the driver started arguing because they left too late. At this time, Zeon lay silently in the trunk, with his hands tied. Every time, it was the same, but still the sand began to move at his will. This meant that the abilities were still awakened. It was unclear why his rank insignia wasn't visible, and the color was slightly different. Orange, the same as sand. In general, the color of the rank mark depended on the classification of the awakened one. The magic class had a blue color, combat class, red. There were awakened ones of other classes as well. But Zeon had never heard of the ability to control sand before. The rank sign displayed the lowest level, F rank. But Zeon felt that in this ability to fear, there was a limitless possibility. Like an endless desert, he decided to wait until this power became completely his and hide it for now. Soon this whole world will become his personal stage. Soon the car brought them to the mine of magic crystals. There was a checkpoint, and everything looked quite normal. One of the men unceremoniously shouted at Zeon to follow him. Since he was still tied up, he did not dare disobey. The captain found it strange that this guy was able to survive, but Giselle was sure that it was just an accident. But Jang Yong-bum had a different opinion on this matter. Suddenly he saw something strange. There was a large hole gaping nearby. He was sure that he would meet this guy again. The night city pulsed with neon arteries. Life was in full swing, from bars to hidden markets, where the whisper of deals mingled with the rhythms of music. Zeon couldn't even imagine that in the mine, except for the tunnels, everything was like in a city. He was ordered to sit quietly and wait for his superiors. He didn't even expect that they would take him and leave him alone like that. His guard thought he was no use, so he said he could do whatever he wanted. Zeon decided to quickly look around, and she was already very hungry. Suddenly his gaze caught sight of a nearby kebab vendor from the crowd. While he was waiting for his portion of shish kebabs, he saw an unusual thing on the wall. The poster proclaimed that the labor of local workers lit up Neo Soul. Seeing this, the kebab maker realized that this was so true that it was funny. But the source of Neo Soul's energy was magic crystals. Zeon asked what he meant and what else could serve as a source of energy. Pointing his finger at the guy, the kebab man replied, "You!" After all, little rats like him did everything they were told, and even replenished their ranks when their numbers became low. An ideal source of energy. Zeon noticed that he knew a suspicious amount for a first meeting, and judging by his age, his peer was already about to make the plunge into the world of the dead. The kebab maker already knew that he had been inside a sandworm, so he asked him how he felt. He laughed, suggesting that Zeon himself could soon become manure for worms, since this place was not the best shelter. The kebab maker decided to show him something interesting. Behind him stood shelves with boxes. These were the little things he had been collecting all this time. A miserable end for those who were brought here, and perhaps the future of Zeon. Anyone who found themselves here initially resisted the urge to go into the mines, horrified by the thought that death awaited them inside. People sold everything they could get their hands on and clung to life to the last. But they were just stalling for time, nothing more. The problems weren't going away, and what little remained was slowly fading. The result was the same for everyone. They started saying that it would be better to let the mine swallow them up. They say that a person leaves a name after death, but trash leaves only trash after death. He was curious about what Zeon would leave behind. Without talking to him anymore, the guy asked to pay him, and the kebab maker asked for 10 suli. Zeon was furious at the price, but everything was in short supply in this place. Even the kebab stick he'd thrown away cost a whopping 9 suli. The guy smiled slyly and replied that he didn't have that kind of money. Zeon was sure that they wanted to cheat him like a newbie, but at this time, several dozen sharp knives were already flashing behind his back. The guy categorically had no intention of giving the kebab man this money. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he felt some movement behind him. But when he turned around, there was only darkness behind him. Smiling, the old man sarcastically asked me if I thought it was strange to him how he could trade so calmly right in the mine. In the pitch darkness around the boy, sharp knives flickered ominously, forming a ring, and dozens of burning eyes flashed out of the darkness, cold, unblinking, as if space itself held its breath in anticipation of the fateful moment. The old man, tilting his head slightly to the side, grinned. Mischievous sparks danced in the corners of his wrinkled eyes. Zeon slammed his fist down on the table. It seemed crazy to him to pay that kind of money for some meat. The old man smiled and suggested that he pay in another way, since he had enough money. For example, he really liked the magic stone in Zeon's pocket. He was shocked that they already knew about this. The old man ordered that it be taken out so that he could evaluate it fairly. But Zeon didn't want to do this, because this kebab maker didn't even imagine what he had to go through. Suddenly, someone's huge hand fell on the guy's head, and he quickly offered to lend him the money. The next second, The big man behind him slammed his forehead into the table with all his might. These butchers already wanted to bury him. Seizing the opportunity, Zeon stuck out his finger and unleashed a blast of sand. And that very moment, the big guy's arm was severed, as if by a knife, and it shot up like a piece of sausage. Not expecting such a turn of events, the other sellers and cooks stood there, dumbfounded, holding the severed stump in their hands. Sand arrows began to fly across the entire alley like projectiles. Zeon became furious and decided to show off his strength a little, but it was all just in his head. The big guy asked why he was standing there and staring at one point as if he had dozed off. Zeon had no choice but to throw the magic stone into the kebab maker's hand. He sincerely wished that he would choke on this thing. The first thing the old man did was to estimate the size of the stone and offer 100 suli for it. But the guy categorically disagreed with this, assuming that he was worth at least 300. But in this world, everything was valuable, and most likely it would have been better for him to become manure for a worm. Zeon really wanted to kill this old man, but it wasn't the time yet. He asked the kebab man for a fatter change. The place was full of pickpockets and robbers, and one of them was now right in front of him. For change, the old man offered to choose something from the things in the boxes. Zeon was asked to choose any one product. He thought he would find something worthwhile there, but it was all junk. Looking at him, the old man decided that he was quite a funny guy. He was distinguished by his tenacity and unwillingness to lose a deal. He hadn't encountered such a primitive yet powerful will to live in a long time. When the guy was almost in despair, he came across something interesting. It was a little thing that had once been abandoned by a passing caravan. Deciding that there was nothing better to be found here, Zeon decided to take this. The old man decided that he had chosen complete nonsense. As a parting shot, the guy decided to ask the name of this old kebab maker, and he threw his back. Klexi! Zeon sincerely hoped that he would never see this old geezer again. But fate had many more interesting things in store. In one of the boxes, Zeon found an old hourglass. After examining them, he decided that sand had been pouring into them for about 10 minutes. He looked at them while sitting on the floor of the miners' barracks. He was all alone in the room, so he decided to use his power a little. He began to stare at the old clock, and he called upon the sand in them to begin to move. Well, nothing has worked out so far. It turned out that this thing had nothing to do with his awakening. Zeon seemed to be seeing this object for the first time, but there was some strange feeling of déjà vu, as if he was waiting only for him. It was as if he was familiar and calling him, but at the same time the feeling was new. Suddenly one of the miners kicked down the door to his room. This Manhwa was very unhappy that he had to personally go after this newbie to send him to the mine. Zeon asked to stop calling him a loser and at least explain where to go. Well, in response, he knocked him out with one punch. His fist resembled an iron hammer. Manhwa finds it unacceptable that some puppy talks to him like that. He was furious, thinking that this sucker was trying to rip him off. After all, the unawakened, like Zeon, was supposed to remain silent and get punched in the face. And now that he had explained everything to him, it was time for this newbie to get up and go about his business. Zeon clearly remembered her offender, and he promised himself to finish him off. They came to the entrance of the mine, in the 3rd sector. Manhwa ordered that the newcomer be given equipment. The cost of equipment and food was deducted from earnings. If you found a magic stone, you had to drag it out immediately. But Zeon knew all this. The only thing that interested him was how much they paid here. The response was a sharp pickaxe blow that landed right on his helmet. It was the same Manhwa. He wanted to clearly show him how to use a hammer. He ordered Zeon to be sent to the 972nd adit. Manhwa waited for the guy to answer. Another worker hurried to take him away before things got any worse. Zeon had to dig until he found the magic stone. He was just unlucky that day. He came here on the very day when Manhwa lost everything at cards. The guy was very surprised to hear that there was even a casino here. It turned out that the mines were no different from Neo Seoul. There was prostitution, booze, drugs, the whole gamut. With idiots like Manhwa, business was booming. Zeon wasn't particularly keen on swinging a pickaxe, as his skin was delicate and easily injured. But here, he probably wouldn't have to worry about that. No one has ever returned from here wounded. Zeon thought he needed to dig up some crystals and quickly return. But the second worker quickly slammed the elevator doors and said he wouldn't have to go back. After all, more than 15 people had disappeared from here, 4 of whom he knew personally. As he was going up in the elevator, he shouted to Zeon, "Sorry, and thanks for agreeing to go where no one else wants to go." It turned out that all the people before him died in this hole, and the second worker just took off and left, leaving him there alone. It turned out that Zeon ended up here simply because of Manhwa's bad mood. Suddenly, the pickaxe slipped out of his hands, and like a ball, she bounced into the depths of the mine. Zeon had to follow her. He began to look around to figure out what kind of place this was. He was so angry that he didn't even notice that there was a very dense concentration of mana there. Ordinary people apparently couldn't feel it. The further he walked, the weaker it became. A normal person would have long since been overwhelmed by mana. In general, it was strange where she came from here at all. Suddenly in the darkness, he saw his pickaxe. The handle was broken, of course, but he was glad that he was able to find it at all. Zeon ran straight towards her, deciding that he was lucky today. But suddenly, he sensed something was wrong. Some kind of portal opened right under his feet. His helmet flew off somewhere to the side, shining a flashlight on the broken pickaxe handle. Zeon was abandoned by his parents, and his life was destined to have only one outcome. But what kind of life did he dream of? He just wanted to avoid having to go hungry. I wanted to sleep normally and see a dream at least once in my life, so that you don't have to choke with horror and immediately run away, so that you don't have to worry about dying at any moment. I dreamed of the most ordinary life, and now he was lying in an unknown place. It was hot and stuffy there, and my head was splitting. Running his hand along the ground, Zeon realized that everything around was strewn with ash. Now it began to dawn on him. Since he fell into the portal, it could mean one thing. He's inside the dungeon! A stone fell under Zeon's hand. He picked it up and held it in his hand. It turned out that he was terribly hot. It wasn't a dream. Even in Neo Soul, they entered the dungeons prepared. Perhaps there was volcanic ash all around, like sand heated by fire. Then they had to get out of there quickly before their lungs fried. Action was needed. If there was an entrance to the dungeon, then there had to be an exit. Most likely, it was a place above the mountain peak that towered over the entire dungeon. Before the monsters appeared, everything possible could have been done to find this exit. Zeon decided to quickly break through by the shortest route. After all, he was a man who did not know how to give up. It was very dangerous. But suddenly the edge of the peak that he was holding on to began to fall off, and the guy flew down straight into the hot lava. Well, at the last moment, I managed to grab hold of a small ledge. He tried to convince himself that the lava didn't scare him at all. Zeon paused for a second to catch his breath, his fist clenched with wild anger. As if possessed, he screamed that as soon as he got out of Manhwa, it would be the end. It seemed to him that his anger was making him even hotter, and he decided to turn off his psycho mode. He would have been obliged to survive and struggle with all his might. There are only 4 jumps left, and then Zeon will be in place. There was no way to stop. We had to act. He gave himself his word that in this hole, his life will never end. At the moment of his jump, a giant crocodile emerged from the seething hell of molten lava and opened its huge mouth. With a deafening crack that shook the earth, the crocodile's mighty jaws snapped shut and its sharp teeth clamped down. The giant monster dove into his fiery hell again. It was as if he didn't feel these temperatures, and he floated along the hot river. But suddenly, hot ash began to fall on him from above. It was so hot here that even the ashes melted. Zeon wasn't sure, but it turned out that he could control ash as well. He was very lucky that he was able to survive. But in this dungeon, the environment was more terrifying than the monsters. From the heat and ash, the nasal mucosa seemed to be completely burnt out. It became increasingly difficult to breathe, and consciousness began to float. But Zeon promised himself to survive. It was too unfair to die like this, and he found the strength to get to his feet. He challenged the Lord of Death to take the crocodile skin bag in his stead. The huge mouth jumped out again from the very heart of hell, trying to get the guy. Zeon used his ability again. Suddenly he heard someone's voice, which appreciated his skill. Looking up, he couldn't believe his eyes. A familiar figure flew towards him like a bird. That same old man from the kebab shop. Now it was falling straight towards him. He was clutching the hilt of a sword in his hand. A terrible grin slid across his face. Zeon looked at him without taking his eyes off him. A column of powerful energy struck the monster's head straight. The entire dungeon was illuminated by a bright flash. Lava flowed in all directions. The shockwave threw rocks and ash at Zeon. He couldn't understand what had happened. His eardrums were bursting with words. He couldn't hear anything. Zeon looked at the old man as if enchanted and could not understand who he was. He was different, completely different. Not just a powerful, awakened one. This was something else. Like a creature from another dimension, he took a step towards the guy, and in the midst of the hellish silence, only one word was heard. Name! Zeon had to tell him his name. From this second, the countdown began. 3, 2, 1. And in the guy's eyes, it was as if this man was frozen. Looking straight at him, the old man suddenly said, "Ding!" Without waiting for an answer, he again took out his sword from behind his back, and he shouted to Zeon, "Die!" The guy started screaming for him to wait and not kill him. The old man repeated his question about the name, and the boy answered immediately. But for some reason, the old man didn't like it, so Zeon asked him to tell him his name. The old man thrust his sword into the ground, and a huge column of energy burst out. It was Deyoden. The guy was very scared and asked what just happened. Zeon really didn't like that he was insulted and threatened all the time. He was grateful for the man saving him, but he didn't understand what he had done to deserve such treatment. As if ignoring all his words, Deyoden looked around and said that he most likely got into a noose. This was a phenomenon that occurs when a dungeon becomes oversaturated with mana. The dungeon protects itself by creating an additional entrance and expelling mana through this gap. At the same time, this is a phenomenon that traps all living things. An ordinary person would never see something like this in their entire life. So Zeon was simply incredibly lucky. Deyoden called the guy an insult again and then asked him not to do it again. The old man decided to show him why he called him that and asked him to concentrate mana in his eyes and look. He needed to increase the purity of his mana. Imagine that he sees not with his eyes, but with mana. Feel it. And Zeon succeeded. Before him was a monster capable of turning invisible. Its evolving prey wouldn't even realize it was being devoured. Just like Zeon. Such a colossus came so close, but he didn't notice its presence or the slightest strangeness. If it weren't for this old man, he would have died without even understanding anything. It turns out that he has already saved his life twice. This man was incredibly strong. Zeon decided to ask him again who he was, but the man responded by calling him an idiot and saying his name again. Zeon, breaking into a scream, tried to find out who this man was and where they were. Without even turning to face him, Deyoden replied that these dungeons were his hunting grounds, and he suggested that I take a look with my own eyes. The old man took out his sword and shouted, "Keon!" And the lava began to flow in the opposite direction, rising upward. The ears began to suffer from this force again. Zeon watched what this old man was doing. Enormous birds of prey with fiery feathers appeared above them. Deyoden called the guy a moron again, and if he was worth anything, he should have survived himself. He was a truly crazy old man. These winged creatures were very fast. Hot coals fell from their wings like hail, and they themselves flew like fiery arrows. Zeon couldn't even run away from them, but he noticed that they only bit on the left side. He put his left hand forward to begin controlling the ash. His blaster fired its first round, but he received several blows from his opponent in response. He couldn't keep up with these birds either, with sand or with his eyes. Before he actually died here, something had to be thought up. This old man has already saved him twice. If this time the guy really dies, it will be proof that he is an idiot. Zeon looked at him with wide eyes. He clearly understood that he was telling him something, but he heard absolutely nothing. Zeon had to find a way to see an enemy that the eyes couldn't keep up with. You had to think very quickly. It only took a little while to see that he was actually an idiot. Zeon remembered his words about concentrating mana in the eyes and increasing its purity. You had to see the mana, feel it. Now Zeon could clearly see the enemy moving towards him. He raised a swirl of sand into the air. He needed to capture the mana of these creatures. When the monster's mana got close, it was necessary to counterattack from a minimum distance. Zeon did exactly as he said. Now it became clear that this old man had foreseen everything in advance. All that remains is to understand who is in front of him. For Deyoden, it was just pure fun. He hasn't been this excited in a long time. As if possessed, he screamed, "More!" He encouraged the monsters not to be shy and to come closer to him. Deyoden dealt with each of them with lightning speed. This made him feel a little offended. After all, he was just starting to warm up. This number of monsters was too few for him. It's not like what happened in his time. For Zeon, this looked like pure madness. For a second, he even felt sorry for these monsters. The old man single-handedly finished off the enormous machine. It was so absurd that the boy was speechless. Apparently, there are no more monsters left. And suddenly, he remembered one more. Hot lava splashed in huge streams in all directions. An unbearable wave of sound crashed down on them. Zeon's body couldn't take it anymore and decided to cleanse itself. Deyoden explained that it was the boss's roar. Each dungeon had a final boss, its source. That's why this old man came here. Now this picture opened up to Zeon's gaze. Deyoden was glad to have such guests. The final boss here was the Crimson Drake. Although it wasn't a dragon, it was still at least a B class. But such a class meant one thing. This monster had a force field. Zeon had heard that B-class monsters and above, like humans, had their own abilities. It was akin to the awakened rank symbols. If the force field is red, it's a combat class, but it could have been blue. Like this Drake, magic class, it was fucking imber. Zeon didn't even notice how the old man rushed into the attack. He watched his actions with his mouth open. It was pointless. All his experience and knowledge were just empty words in front of this old man. He fought the final boss as if possessed. The monster's claws were ready to grab him at any moment. But this old man's sword didn't give this colossus any chance. But suddenly, something went wrong. Deyoden found himself in the clawed paws of a huge creature, and a huge magic ball appeared to save him. But this situation only amused the old man. The monster's mouth slammed shut, and the magic projectile exploded inside it. Laughing maliciously, he asked Drake if it hurt. He wanted to personally relieve him of this pain. After all, today was this monster's last day. Zeon began to worry that this day might be his last. He really wanted these two crazy people to settle everything with words. Having run away the distance he managed to cover, the guy managed to create a sand shield around himself. This helped him escape from a powerful energy bomb. He would really like them to fight somewhere further away. Such a collapse was caused by just one shockwave. But for Deyoden, it was fun and a real thrill. He rode the Crimson Drake, or flew on him, as if in an amusement park. Suddenly, for a moment, the two disappeared somewhere behind the splashes of lava. Zeon saw these flashes of energy. They were getting closer and closer to him. Nothing good could be expected from this. And the next moment, the wave threw him far back. He flew like a toy ball, hitting all his sides. But suddenly he realized that the ground beneath him had ended. And now he was flying towards the Permians, into the hot lava. He tried to watch with mana. He saw this old man fight an epic battle with a monster. With a possessed expression on his face, he teased Drake more and more. He didn't even consider him a boss. In response, he again released a clot of magical energy. Deyoden egged him on, saying that he was still capable of something. And Drake released a huge stream of energy from his side. It was incredibly powerful, like a hurricane. Drake was sure that was the end of it, but suddenly the same voice was heard. And Deyoden's huge sword pierced the monster through and through. Drake let out a piercing scream. The old man spent a whole year scouring the desert in search of this enemy. He needed his heart to temper the crayon. And now it's time for the monster to die. He thrust his sword even deeper, and the dungeon began to fill with red energy. The crayon was illuminated by a red light, like blood. Every curve of his body screamed of this victory. It was filled with this magical power. He was toughening up. Deyoden achieved what he desired. Crayon has become stronger. Hearing him talking to the sword, Zeon decided that he had gone crazy. Seeing the guy alive, the old man was very surprised that this idiot didn't die. Although he was practically on the verge of death, he was already flying down towards the hot lava. The thought flashed through his head that this was the last moment of his life. But then he remembered again that he had promised himself not to die. He used all his strength in a second, and he managed to make himself a bed of sand. This time he got away with it again and survived. he was incredibly lucky. Because this old man was constantly hitting him with shockwaves, Zeon's reaction level increased by itself. The old man reminded us that since the boss was dead, the dungeon would soon collapse and we had to get out quickly. After these words, Deyoden pulled the boy by the jacket and he asked why he was doing this. In response, the old man only laughed loudly, and then he threw it with all his might into the opened portal. After this, the guy thought that this crazy old man was even worse than Manhwa. But suddenly, he realized that he was in a desert. The portal spat him out like chewed gum. Zeon tried to find out from the old man where they were, and he explained that somewhere outside the dungeon, a crack had formed during the collapse, and that was the exit. The guy didn't really like that they came out in such a strange way. Deyoden needed his ability to manipulate sand, but in his current half-dead state, the boy was of little use. He decided to give him a choice. If he goes right, he'll reach Neo Soul. He'll return to the city and live as before. And if he goes with him, he will become a much cooler idiot than he is now. Zeon wanted to know how long the journey with him would take. The old man himself didn't know the answer to this question. It could take months, years, maybe even decades. Until you realize the time has come. The choice had to be made right now. Zeon had to decide whether to return to his normal, calm life or get involved in an adventure where the probability of death was 99%. Deyoden waited for the boy to answer. This choice made Zeon laugh a lot. He asked if his grandfather was in his right mind. He offered him to give up the shelter of a warm bed and peace in order to wander with him across these scorched sands. Deyoden once again confirmed his proposal, but there was nothing more to say here, and Zeon naturally agreed to go with him. If someone angered the guy, he was obliged to pay back, but now he was too weak, so there was no talk of revenge. This also applied to Deyoden. He was stronger than anyone he had ever met in his life, and it would have been very difficult to meet someone stronger. The old man laughed and said that he was simply afraid of dying. But Zeon assumed that if he followed him, he would become stronger than anyone else. Deyoden warned him that this confidence would one day turn into regret. But now they had a very long way to go, and the old man continued to call him an idiot. The scorching sun continued to burn out the already lifeless desert. Zeon begged the old man to walk at least a little slower. They had been walking for several hours already, and the guy really wanted to rest a little, but he seemed not to hear him, and did not even turn around. Zeon felt like he was acting like a capricious schoolgirl and was suffering from mood swings. It was hellishly hot in the desert, probably about 50 degrees. The sand made it hard to walk, and the boy was sure he would soon collapse from heat stroke or dehydration. But suddenly Deyoden shouted that he had never seen a dumber idiot, that you couldn't use even 1% of your power. After all, the guy could control the sand, and yet he was still trudging through it. It was called a pitiful sight. But for Zeon, it wasn't all that simple, because he only woke up the day before yesterday. But the old man didn't see any problem with this. Zeon started saying that he was only an F rank, and not a high-ranking awakened like some people. These words made the grandfather lose his temper, and he started shouting at him to stop talking nonsense. After all, no one was born with a high rank, and if there were such people, they were simply lucky. After all, for some people, he is already incredibly gifted. These words were etched into Zeon's head. The guy needed to stop whining and think about how to use his ability. After all, it was his power, which meant he knew it better than others. He had to figure out for himself how to use his power and how to clear his mind. The old man squeezed his shoulder so hard it cracked. After all, if he doesn't figure it out, then consider him a corpse. Suddenly, the sand began to rise around him. Zeon began to try to control the sand. The radius of his power was about 5 meters. Not much, but overall sufficient. My feet were sunk in this sand up to my ankles. Solving this problem would save me a lot of effort. Zeon decided to try to compact the sand and make it hard. It worked. My legs stopped sinking and walking became much easier. But that required too much mana. It wasn't a viable option in the long run. Now he tried to concentrate his mana in his legs. And indeed, it became much easier to walk. Looking at all this, the old man realized that this guy was still very green. But not giving up and continuing to try is the privilege of the young. Although Zeon was F rank in terms of strength and mana control, he was already somewhere around ED. Suddenly the guy yelled that he succeeded. Now he began to control only the sand that touched his feet, and walking became much easier. Zeon grinned at his grandfather, because now he could walk almost at ease. But suddenly, Deyoden's fist brought him back to his senses. He advised him not to waste his energy until he died. There was already little time, so he had to go faster. When the guy woke up, he tried to figure out where he was. The old man was unhappy that he had lost so much time because of him. Zeon tried to justify himself by saying that he hadn't returned from a resort either, since his body was covered in injuries. Deyoden tossed him a piece of dried meat. While the boy was eating, the old man decided to tell him something from his childhood. In those days, even if someone was weak or inferior to others, they could survive without any problems. After all, protecting the weak was even considered a noble deed. But now the world had changed, and he could not get used to it. If the guy was determined to die, he could continue lying there quietly. But if not, he had to get up and go all the way. Zeon understood him well and began to get up. The old man threw him the second piece of meat. Now he understood that Deyoden had really lived a damn long time, and over the years he had accumulated a lot of memories. Suddenly he noticed that the old man was still unable to finish the first piece of meat. He wasn't chewing it, as if he was soaking it in saliva. Although in the desert, where there is almost no water, this was indeed the best option. It was as if the old man didn't give the boy a ready-made fish, but showed him how to catch it, although he himself had never seen a fish in his life. Zeon asked his grandfather for another piece, but he just told him to shut up and move on. Soon the boy began to sneeze. It was incredibly cold in the desert at night. The crazy old man talked to his sword all night and didn't let me sleep properly. Apparently he's completely lost his mind. Zeon was tormented by unbearable thirst, but his grandfather managed to get himself some water. The guy was very angry that he knew how to do it, but didn't tell him. He wrung the dew from his clothes and drank it. Now it became clear why he had laid it all out before going to bed. At this time, Zeon tried to lick at least a couple of drops of water from himself. Now she herself understood that he was an idiot. Suddenly the grandfather asked if he felt anything. Listening closely, the guy felt a vibration, and not one, and not two. They were surrounded by a whole pack of huge hyenas. They were nocturnal, and they came across them just in the morning. The old man asked if Zeon needed help, or if he could get out on his own. But the guy already knew what to do in this situation. That's why he refused help. He decided that he could cope on his own and survive without the help of this grandfather. But everything turned out to be not so simple. There were too many hyenas, and they were very fast. Zeon decided to use all his skills, and in time, he made a shield out of sand. But the enemy continued to exist. The guy urgently needed another plan, because it looked like mana was about to run out. The power of a blow wasn't the most important thing right now. What was needed was spectacular attacks and mana conservation. We needed to figure out how to fight while spending less mana. Well, while he was thinking, one of the hyenas managed to get too close to him, and she already wanted to bite his hand on the sly. Because of this creature, there was now a throw wound on his hand. Blood ran down his skin in thin lines. Smelling the scent of fresh blood, the hyenas rushed towards him as if possessed. They ran at him from behind, and Zeon was still immersed in his thoughts. But now he knew for sure that to defeat them, he had to punch a hole right through them. There was no need to blow their heads to smithereens. In battle, mana was directly linked to life. Panic could waste mana, which could send one to the other world faster. Minimal damaging power for each enemy, and minimal mana expenditure. That's what it meant to fight intelligently. Grandfather did the same, step by step, without rushing. One of the hyenas bit him. This lousy cur dared to sink its fangs into him, but a dog that bit a man was not left alive. So he decided to unwind them all. Zeon wanted to stop him, but he decided to destroy them all, root and branch, and the real massacre began. The hyenas flew through the air like autumn leaves. The grandfather seemed to have gone crazy and did not notice that there was a man standing next to him. After some time, a large, bloody crater formed in the middle of the desert. Zeon was already doubting whether he was human. He even decided that he needed to show off less with him. The last one left was the female leader. She was screaming like she was being cut, but suddenly she decided to use a force barrier. This ability was at least B-class, but this didn't stop Grandfather. Zeon tried to warn him that it was very dangerous, but he didn't want to listen to anything. What he saw left the guy in further shock. Grandpa absorbed the entire energy charge. He even liked it. His shoulder stopped hurting, and when the massage was over, he decided to send the hyena to the next world. And he finished her off with a blow from his sword. It was better not to think about this person at all in order to save your nerves. After all the hyenas were killed, Zeon suggested moving on, and the grandfather was again surprised that this idiot was still alive. The old man decided to take the great horned hyena's horn with him. It could make a good weapon, and he gave the guy a dagger. It was a gift so that he could get his own food. The muscles of such a hyena were poisonous, but the meat from the sides could be eaten. Zeon had never done anything like this before, but his grandfather urged him on as dawn was breaking soon. The sun began to rise over the endless desert, and the dried meat turned out pretty good. My mouth was dry, but there was plenty of food, and with the new sandy steppe, it was a pleasure to walk. Zeon began to mock his grandfather, saying that at his age he shouldn't work so hard. In response, Deyoden wanted to hit him with his fist, but the boy learned to dodge. But he still missed the blow to the top of his head. The old man was infuriated by such conversations. The guy tried to explain that he was just joking, but the guy shoved his face into the sand, even though his throat was already dry. Suddenly, Zeon felt a feeling of dampness. He saw that his grandfather was looking in the same direction. There was clearly something behind this dune. They climbed almost to its top, and they looked beyond this endless ridge. It really was an oasis. Zeon had only heard about him, but never seen him. He rolled head over heels towards the water. Grandfather hissed at him to keep quiet, but he no longer heard him and ran to the water that he had dreamed of for so long. He dipped his whole head into the oasis. The water seemed to soak into him. After so many days in the desert, he finally felt the coolness enveloping his body again. But suddenly he saw something in the thickness of the water. It was light, warm and blinding, and suddenly I got tired of feeling sleepy. His grandfather's voice began to bring him back to his senses. He was already running to help him, and Zeon looked at the water as if enchanted. In the depths of the oasis, a monster was already waiting for him. Grandfather managed to grab Zeon by the clothes. Suddenly, a huge monster jumped out of the water. The guy screamed when he saw it. Deyoden did not lose his composure and asked to attack the enemy. He gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, and with one sharp blow, he sent the overgrown fish back into the water. This was something Zeon had only heard about. Now I saw a rainbow. It was a sand catfish. He lured his victim with a lantern on his forehead and then devoured him. Having finished his story, the grandfather hit Zeon on the cheek with his elbow. You wanted to bring him to his senses by explaining that he had not yet achieved anything, and idiots like him were the first to die in this desert. This time the guy didn't argue. After this, the old man ordered him to skin him. The sand catfish was a C-class magical beast. Its belly skin could be made into an excellent cloak. Zeon decided that the baby wanted a new cloak, but it turned out that Zeon himself needed this thing. Deyoden screamed so loudly that the boy almost went deaf. This sandy dream was very similar to the fish that lived on Earth in the past. The old man understood that Zeon had hardly ever seen a fish, so he suggested that they take a look at it while he had the opportunity. He really saw her for the first time. The fish were kind of creepy. The old man began to joke that even a dead fish would wake up from Zeon's caresses. This fish really did look creepy. I needed to concentrate and start cutting it. First, the blade needed to be filled with mana to increase its cutting ability. The fins had to be cut very thin and used as needles, and used tendons instead of threads. Zeon looked at his creation, but the grandfather's verdict was not comforting. He turned normal fish into slop. But there was plenty of material, and the guy decided to try again. At this time, a cold night fell on the desert. Zeon was glad that he finally got a normal cloak after 8 failures. He even decided that this could be traded. Suddenly, Deyoden called out to him. The boy was afraid that he wanted to take the cloak for himself, but he wanted to give him something to eat. It was gallbladder, a rare medicine. Therefore, it was necessary to eat every last drop. Otherwise, death. Grandfather asked to quickly take this delicacy before his arm fell off. Zeon began to absorb it piece by piece. It was a terribly bitter mess, but it was better than getting hit on the head. Some of the stuff had a very strange consistency, like you were chewing a cloud, but there was absolutely no feeling of satiety. But Zeon dealt with it quickly. Now it's time to burn alive. The guy thought it was a joke, but it wasn't like that. His body seemed to be burning from the inside. Flesh, mana, everything was out of control. Pain. My heart felt like it was writhing in my stomach, but the old man ordered to be patient. It was all like an oasis in the desert. Soon it would disappear like a mirage, forgotten forever. There in the desert, the sand catfish will be reborn and return. But Zeon didn't want to listen to this. Philosophy was enough for him. He wanted to be saved. The old man glanced at him sideways. Zeon dreamed of teaching this to the old men, but he wanted to be left alone in his sleep. Having woken up, Zeon again tried to understand where he was. The first thing I saw was the old man's face, so he scared Zeon very much. He was unconscious the whole time. The old man asked how he felt, and the guy realized that his health had changed. The body became light as dust, the muscles steel like wire, and mana raged like a hurricane. It was a very sharp leap in development. It was all thanks to the bile of the sand catfish. It gave the strength to withstand sun and sand. For a caravan, it was worth as much as a magic crystal. The medicine worked perfectly for Zeon. The old man considered him very weak, so he decided to strengthen him. Until the entire carcass is eaten, they will not move anywhere. The sun was high above the desert again. The travelers ate their fill for 4 whole days. Now it's time to hit the road again. Zeon smiled quietly. Now he was ready for the long journey. But suddenly the sand began to move on its own. It looked like a sandstorm was starting. But to the guy, she was like a light breeze. And the grandfather continued walking without stopping. For several days, he did not utter a word. They walked for 2 weeks without stopping. Zeon even thought that they were lost. But suddenly a monster appeared behind him. With one flick of his finger, the guide destroyed it. Now it was necessary to understand how much further we had to go. Suddenly, Zeon heard a strange, rustling sound behind him. It was another overgrown monster. It would have been better, of course, to just pass by, but not this time. These guys were serious. Zeon ordered them to get out. After all, soon Grandpa will rip their heads off. Huge ants began to surround Zeon. These guys obeyed him perfectly, and he was able to instantly destroy them with a blaster. He was already enjoying the days with sandstorms. Everywhere you looked, there was sand. But suddenly, he saw that the old man had already gone very far away. There was no camaraderie in this man. Zeon really hoped that his grandfather didn't listen to him. But the radius of Zeon's education zone was 10 meters. The old man was always on guard and never let his guard down. Therefore, he could react instantly to the appearance of some creature. What Zeon now caught was a little different. Now it was not just a monster, but something close to pure horror. Crowds of ants were running towards them. Zeon tried to understand where such a horde came from. There were countless numbers of them. But Deyoden seemed not to hear him, and the guy kept trying to shout to him. Grandfather definitely couldn't help but smell these creatures, which means he deliberately left the boy alone. But these were just insects. Zeon made a huge ball out of sand. He tried his best, but this time, something went wrong. The ants grabbed him and dragged him away as prey. Attacking in a crowd was very mean. The ants were dragging Zeon somewhere. He fired the blaster as best he could. The entire desert around was covered with a curtain of sand, but suddenly a man appeared on a stone above her. Zeon was able to find himself a higher shelter. He wanted to climb higher and look around, because these creatures could not fly. But suddenly something appeared next to him. It was a huge ant. They built a bridge to it from their relatives. It looked like a terrible joke. This simply could not have happened. Grabbing Zeon, they dragged him down. He started to fall and couldn't do anything. His landing point, of course, was the desert sand. He lay there and couldn't cough, and the old man watched the urine all this time. Anger filled Zeon. He wanted the old man to watch carefully how he would survive here. But his grandfather encouraged him. His ability was a real blessing in this world. With it, he could live no worse than others. But that would have been the end of it. The thick-headed idiots didn't understand why the world had become like this and were chasing ghosts. An awakened person must master and develop skills on their own and not be a product of a conveyor belt. He still couldn't forget. What was that massacre like 100 years ago? How helpless he was then, and how many people died before his eyes. These were his comrades, neighbors, family. He couldn't protect anyone, not even his daughter. But Zeon is a different matter entirely. He had the potential to be anything. He needed to throw himself into battle, to cross the line between life and death, and as a result, become even stronger than now. Zeon understood perfectly well that he was in complete trouble. The monsters were coming at him in a whole army. In response, he created a super-compressed sand rocket, as simple and crude as possible. He led her along like a faithful dog. Zeon put gravity, wind power, and all available energy into it. Thus, its power increased tenfold. Now, everyone was definitely finished. But he didn't become even stronger. Deyoden watched him with curiosity. Zeon stood surrounded by outfits, and they began to explode one after another. This caused Zeon to laugh eerily. He wanted his grandfather to see his triumph. But suddenly he sensed something was wrong. The monster behind made no sound or sign. Now it became clear that it was poison. Mana was poorly controlled from the start. The poison blocked the mana channels. Zeon was very unhappy with this situation. He couldn't figure out where he was at all. And then I realized it was an anthill. Something was squeaking on the ground nearby. These were larvae. They already smelled his hand, and they sank their claws into her. The body did not move, so they could eat it alive. But Zeon didn't care anymore. The end was probably already flashing before his eyes. The larvae nearby kept squeaking. Zeon found the strength in himself and punched the ground. The monsters were a little taken aback, but Zeon didn't want to give up so easily. After all, he didn't have a single good memory before his death. He challenged this ant-like little thing, and a squall of sand fell upon them. The ants stood in confusion. More stones began to rain down on them from above, huge stones. And finally, Zeon prepared his rockets. His rank mark rose one level. The poisons disappeared, and he had more than enough mana. It was an evolution. Everything was a cut above the old man's. But this still wasn't enough. There wasn't a scratch on the monster. He pushed him with his paw, and Zeon went flying head over heels. This psycho smashed the rock as if it were made of sand. The guy responded by dropping pepper bombs, but they didn't even scratch the enemy. So he might not have been able to cope with it. After all, there wasn't a single trace of an attack on him. We had to think about how to defeat the impenetrable armor, find a way to rip it off entirely. At this moment, Zeon entered the battle. He decided to twist the armor and glue it together with the skin. The monster began to make strange sounds. A magic ball appeared between his claws. He was about to strike. Zeon did not expect this turn of events. It was a high frequency. It could have screwed his brains out. The waves began to disperse one after another. This creature hid this until the very end. Zeon waited for the climax, but it was still unclear which of them would die. He is either a monster or a monster. He decided to go to the last. The guy focused on his mana. Suddenly his body became somehow strange. It was the ceiling. The body was very weak. An old man caught him. If he continues to lie here, he will freeze to death. Now the guy was very happy to see him. He decided to give him the final blow. The Ant Queen was much stronger than Zeon, but he did not give up in the face of death. He earned the right to live. Zeon didn't hear his words because his eardrums were ruptured. The grandfather grabbed him by the clothes and carried him somewhere. He wanted to show him something. It was some kind of ball. Zeon wanted his grandfather to explain what this thing was. On the wall next to it was a sign that read, "Queen's egg, medicine to be eaten, strawberry flavored." Zeon did not remember anything that happened. He didn't know if it was even possible to eat it. After all, he was afraid of dying from pain for the second time, as happened with the catfish. Of course, he could have died, but now he didn't hear anything. But since he was going to die anyway, he decided to eat the egg. Zeon had no idea what strawberry tasted like, but it was damn delicious. Now he wanted more. The guy tried to get the old man to explain that he was a baron. It was Huangjiang. Inside out. Queen ant eggs are a powerful poison. The slightest dose can cause internal organs to disintegrate. The person who ate it feels like needles are piercing all his organs. He begins to feel sick and eventually dies. But to survive in this crazy world, you had to get used to it. But it was hard to get used to this, and Zeon began to feel sick. He was bleeding. The guy thought he had met someone he could trust, but it turns out that he was an idiot after all. Grandfather turned out to be completely different. Meanwhile, the old man was examining the ant's armor. He thrust his hand into it with all his might. I felt something there and pulled it out. These were the monster's magic crystals, a real stroke of luck. He decided to take all the ants, just in case. The sword was supposed to help him with this. Then he fraternized with Zeon and called him a friend. He already believed that his destiny as a weak person was to die. The old man began to take out his sword. They had very little time. Zeon woke up after some time. He was very surprised that he remained alive. In response, the old man received dust in his face. Zeon was quite the impudent guy. The old man quietly asked why he was raising dust, but Zeon was in a very warlike mood. Grandfather asked him once again not to show off. But Zeon didn't understand why he shouldn't do this. After all, he tried to kill him. But why shouldn't he do it? The guy wasn't going to forgive it. And the stone spears were already aimed at the victim. The sand held them. A real storm was rising all around. Zeon was very angry, but his grandfather again called him an idiot and asked what he was doing. The queen's egg was indeed full of substances capable of blowing your mind, but the guy should have at least had some common sense. And there wasn't a scratch on him. The old man could kill him with one flick on the forehead. Poisoning him was pointless. Now Zeon began to understand a little. The queen's egg drew all the toxins out of the body. All the crap came out of him, and mana took his place. It has grown 3 or even 4 times in size. Now Zeon understood everything. He threw himself on the old man's neck and began to apologize, although he himself felt disgusted by it. The old man asked him not to whine, although he understood everything too. Zeon only survived because he was strong enough, although it was a lousy adventure. But it was time to move on. Grandfather grabbed him by the scruff of the neck again. There was no time left. It was necessary to hurry. Zeon already suspected something was wrong. New monsters awaited them. They flew out of the sand like a projectile. Zeon wanted to be able to move normally, at least sometimes. But it turned out that he had been sleeping for 4 days straight. Suddenly the old man noticed something. Nothing could surprise Zeon anymore. But here, even he was surprised. The huge turtle looked down at the bottom like a rock. Although it was almost 30 kilometers away, it was scary to imagine its size up close. Grandfather said that this is the mobile fortress Archelon. It is a B-class turtle-like monster by nature, but its defensive characteristics surpass even A. It was tamed, and now people moved on it. The world was truly vast, and in it, there were such monsters that were capable of riding such monsters. I had to remember this with my own eyes. Suddenly, someone flew out of the turtle and landed next to them. The old man was sure who was in front of them. They hadn't seen this man for a long time, and he also knew Deyoden very well.